I have written a collection of biographies of Martin Luther, Francis of Assisi, John Wesley, the founder of the Methodist Church, and the famous martyr Thomas Becket. I have written the biographies in creative nonfiction style, which is where you take nonfiction and add details so it reads like fiction. I've done this because I wanted the stories to come alive, and I not only want to educate but also to entertain. Here is a story about how the book came about. I've written for a long time. I used to write horror fiction and poetry. I took a composition class at DMAC and learned about creative nonfiction. I didn't write a lot of things in this format at this time, but the idea intrigued me and I wanted to explore it more if I came upon a good subject. I continued to write and I got published in a few magazines. I started to write articles for a website and I paid a small amount, but it seems like every dollar that I made writing was more rewarding than a dollar that I made from other things. After I had wrote 1,000 articles for them, they changed their payment structure and the only way I would get paid was to review other articles. I stopped writing for a while, being discouraged. I had read a few places that it was more lucrative to write nonfiction than fiction, and one day I noticed how my daughter was crazy about a boy band. I did a search and found a ton of books about them. Then I said to myself, what about an actor instead of a musician, and maybe someone not as famous? I searched for Val Kilmer and was amazed that no one had written a book about him. I wrote the book and self-published it, printing 200 copies. I mainly sold on eBay and was contacted by flatsign.com to sell them 110 copies of the book if Val Kilmer would agree to sign them. He did, which was kind of exciting. When I had sold or given away the 200 books, I decided not to publish another run because sales had slowed down on eBay. It was a few years later when I heard about CreateSpace, and I decided to publish through them. It was print on demand, so I wouldn't be committed to 100 or 200 copies of the title, and it would be available on Amazon. So I decided to try again and wrote a book about Robert Downey Jr. I also bought a few to sell through eBay. I have sold a few hundred copies of each book, but it didn't seem like it would be worthwhile to write another one. Later, I was watching TV and saw an evangelist talk about the story in the Bible when Simon and Andrew get called to be fishers of men, and I thought that I could tell that story. I heard the story of Telemachus on the radio and remembered the story from when I grew up in the Methodist Church about John Wesley's conversion after the ship he was sailing in almost sunk. I wrote the book and sent it to a few publishers and agents. I received a bunch of rejection slips if I heard back at all. Then I started working a new job where I was working 50 hours a week, most weeks, and I was also going to school full time. I just didn't have time to market the book to anyone for about a year. After I graduated and got settled in my new job, I started to send the book out again, and Crosslink emailed me and offered to publish my book if I trimmed it down to around 75,000 words. I was at 90,000 words and I had 9 different stories. I cut out 5 of them to bring the total words down to 72,000. I had cut 2 of the stories that had inspired me to write the book, Telemachus and the fish story. The story about Andrew and Simon I thought didn't belong since the rest of the stories were biographies, although it was the last thing I cut since I thought it turned out to be the best. I got rid of Telemachus because most of the story had to be made up. Not very much was really known about him. I got rid of the 3 other stories because they didn't really seem developed to me, which you can probably tell from the length. 18,000 words for 5 stories I cut versus 72,000 for the 4 I kept. It was kind of hard, but it was worth it to get published. I didn't really think I would want to self-publish any more books. My name is Bill Hamilton, and the book is called Would You Do What They Did? Great Christian Leaders from Our Past. Check out the book, or look at my website if you want more information, www.williamdeanhamilton.net.